welcome. My name is Lisa Kaplowitz. I am the co-founder and executive director of the Rutgers Center for Women in Business, where we remove barriers, build community, and empower women. We do this to keep qualified and talented women in the workplace longer, more competitively, and on track for senior leadership. Why? Because we're really building a workplace that works for everyone. I am so grateful to have with me today Melody Wilding. Thanks for joining.
So
I'm
much
going
for
to say a
having me.
couple wonderful words about you and brag for a little bit. Melody wrote this book, which we're going to talk about a lot, Managing Up, how to get what you need from the people in charge. But she also has many other roles. She's a professor of human behavior at Hunter College, was recently named one of Insider's most innovative career coaches. She has a background as a therapist and an emotions researcher. That really informs her research, her unique approach. She weaves evidence-based neuroscience and psychology with professional development. She wrote another best-selling book, Trust Yourself. And most importantly, she is a proud Rutgers graduate. So welcome, Melody.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really honored to be here with you today, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us.
So before we dive in, I always like to level set where folks are right now. So the first thing I want to do is I want you all to take out your phones and scan this QR code. This is totally anonymous. The instructions are on your left as well if you're on, you just want to use the website as well. But what I want you to do is come up with one word. We're going to build a word cloud. What is the first word you think of when you hear the term managing up? First word that comes to mind. What do you think of when you hear the word managing up? And we're going to build this cloud together. I'm going to look at the responses and see what we're getting. Scary, frustration, confidence, advocacy, influence. I love these word clouds. Aren't they so fun? We're really scared. It seems like a lot of people are scared to manage up. Their managers are very scary. They might not be approachable. Melody, I'm sure we'll get to it and talk about the 4 different manager styles that you've identified as well in the matrix. Confidence, needing confidence. It sounds like to really manage up. Advocacy, it's so important to advocate for yourself. Also understand how your advocacy is really going to add value to the company, because the company or the organization, right, it needs to get something out of it as well, but you need to get something out of it. And so how do we balance both of those? Absolutely exhausting. I love that we're getting less scared. Empowering, trust. We absolutely are going to talk about trust and communication as we go through all of this. So thank you all. I think this is always really fun. The other, and I see some in the comments too, exhausting, meeting needs, tiring. Yes, all of the above. So with that, let's see how you feel, how good you are at this already, okay? So on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the least, very ineffective, 5 being the most, how effective are you at managing up? How effective are you at managing up? A, B is very ineffective, B is somewhat ineffective, C is neutral, D is somewhat effective. Good job. And 5 is you're awesome. Where are we? Are we okay? How effective are we? We've got some pretty good folks, and we think we're somewhat, so we're going to get a little bit of learning, but and a couple that are really good. So the other thing I want folks to realize is we have a chat going the whole time. I'm going to try to monitor it as Melody and I are talking through this. We're going to try to get you off by 12:45 so you can grab a bite to eat before your next meeting. And make this as useful as possible for all of you. So that's our goal today. Great. So it sounds like we're kind of in the middle, if I'm going to look at this right now. We're somewhat to effective to ineffective, but we could definitely do better. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you and I can just talk. Um, and I want to start out, Melody. Why did you write this book in the first place?
Yeah, well, I think the responses to the word cloud are suggest a lot of that, where we have this conflicted relationship around managing up, right? We know it's something we need to do, but we don't necessarily know how to do it well. And really, a lot of this, it came out of a few things. I mean, first and foremost, since the pandemic, I would love to hear from folks in the chat if you resonate with this as well, that the number of people who feel like their career, their relationships at work are out of their control, it has more than doubled in the last 5 years, more than doubled. And I think that just speaks to the fact that, yes, there's that phrase that change is constant, but change is happening even faster than before. And so is complexity, right? Everything's moving faster, it's more complicated. And we can feel like we're just at the whim of everything that's happening around us rather than feeling like we have control and autonomy in our careers. And personal agency is a huge value of mine. So the fact that we spend 70, 80% of our lives at work, yet we feel helpless there sometimes, that wasn't acceptable to me. And so that was one really big reason I wrote this book, in combination with the fact that when my first book, Trust Yourself, came out, I would hear from readers all the time, great, loved it. I feel much more secure within myself and the value I have to offer. But all of this breaks down when I have to advocate for myself. I have to speak up with someone that has higher authority than me. I feel intimidated. I freeze. I don't know. Someone had mentioned in the chat, like corporate speak. I feel like there was this class on influence that other people learned and I somehow missed. And I know you and I have talked before how as you advance in your career, and this is even more true now as AI starts to take over a lot of tasks and technical aspects of work, the ability to manage the people and the human dynamics is becoming more and more important. Yet we never talk about that. We never learn how to navigate other people's psychology and some of these invisible dynamics that are happening around us. So for all of those reasons, I felt like I had to write this book to really fill a need that was happening for people now and something that wasn't out there yet.
No, I think that's great. And, I'm grateful that I had my early copy that's all marked up with notes and
Yeah.
everything else um, right here. And, we got a question in the chat as well about the terminology managing up, because sometimes the folks that are the best at managing up might be the worst at managing across and down
Yeah.
and sideways. And so that's very true. I've been fortunate that I figured it out, some of this stuff pretty quickly in my career, which served me well, but also was very conscious about managing the folks on my team and getting them what they need and trying to train and develop them to also be confident to speak to me about what they need. And so one of the things you talk about is the four different manager personas. And as we do all of these webinars, they somewhat are self-serving as well, because I always love trying to figure out, wait, which box do I fit in and what can I
Yeah.
learn from this and how can I ultimately be better? But you talk about these four manager personas. Can you describe each of them a little bit? How to identify them, and ultimately, how do you manage these managers that might be different in how they think and work than you do?
And sure. And let me just back up for 1 second, because I think what you said, again, someone was mentioning in the chat, I feel very conflicted about that, about the terminology of managing up. And that makes perfect sense. I hear that from people all the time, that I don't want to become a suck up. I don't want to have to ingratiate myself to the people above me. I don't want to have to play politics. That's not what we're talking about here.
Right.
Managing up at the base of it is navigating relationships, building trust and recognition and respect with the people that have more positional authority than you. That's primarily your boss. It is not just your boss, and that's a mistake people make that we can talk more about in a
Yep.
moment. But why I'm saying that is because at the end of the day, managing up is something you should do for yourself to create the conditions for your own success, not necessarily to please the higher ups. And that becomes important when we talk about these four different manager styles. because what I want to put out there is the disclaimer that when I talk about all of these, I'm not suggesting that you should just contort yourself into showing up as someone completely different than you are. Why I want to share this with all of you today is because when you have this information, when you can decode the style of the people around you, then you can make strategic, selective adaptations and changes to how you frame your message, how you approach someone with an idea, ultimately so that you get heard. You can get through to them. You can get buy-in for the things that are important to you, and you don't feel frustrated or take their behavior personally. So,
Melody, I think that's so important.
yeah,
And also, people don't fit in squarely to one of these four different
yes,
personas. They probably have, you know, attributes of all of them. And buy-in and what you're saying is so important. I was horrible at politics. Still not great at it. And navigating the political landscape, have gotten better as I've matured, but still agree with you. It's not politics. It's getting what you need from the people in charge, like your book says.
yes, yeah.
Um, so
And
go into the four personas.
yes. And so at the base of this idea of the four personas is that what we know from research studies over decades now is that if you look at people's personality, psychological motivations, they generally speaking break down into two dimensions. On one dimension, we have dominance. So just imagine one axis. And then on the other axis, we have sociability. So dominance is about how much does someone want to be assertive, feel control in a situation. These people tend to move much more quickly. And then sociability is how much do they care about interacting with other people and their relationships with other people. And so you put that on sort of a graph and you get four different types. And let's start out with people that are high on dominance. Okay. So people that are high on dominance, I call these, they break down into the 4 C's. So in the book, I go much, much more in depth than we'll be able to today. But the first of those 4 C's is the commander. And so this is someone who is high on dominance, lower on sociability. All right. So the commander is your classic, very dominant style that you may think. These people move very quickly, work has a very fast pace. They care a lot about results, the bottom line, progress. They don't care as much about relationships and the people involved and who was on board with what. That's not going to sway them as much as things like meeting objectives, beating the competition, right? Those tend to be their type of motivators. And then if we keep moving around the graph, then we have people that I call cheerleaders. These are people that are also high in dominance, but they're also high in sociability. And so the cheerleader, they do like to move quickly, but because they're more people oriented, they're more of like the visionary, big idea. There's a reason they're called the cheerleaders because they tend to be more enthusiastic, effusive, like they show more emotion and enthusiasm. And as you can imagine, as I'm going through these, all of these have pluses and minuses, drawbacks and strengths to them. So again, going around, then we have people that are low on dominance, high on sociability. That's people I call the caretaker. Caretaker is your more reserved, they may be more quiet. They care a lot about harmony. How does everyone feel? Is everyone healthy, doing really well, keeping the stability? And then last is the controller type. And the controller type is both low on dominance and low on sociability. But the controller type is the person who cares a lot about like process, precision, systems. They want to follow instructions exactly. They care a lot about high quality. They may move slower because they want a lot of the information and data before they make a decision. And so just like you said, Lisa, no one of us is only one of these things. And that's a great thing because it means that even if, for example, I would say for the most part, I tend to be more of a caretaker personality in my communication style. But sometimes in certain situations, I have to flex into the other styles. I have to flex into a commander when there's a crisis happening and I need to be the one making quick decisions and giving really direct feedback. And again, I say all of this because you may be one type, you may be more of a caretaker type working with a commander or a cheerleader. And if you are giving a lot of context up front, you're going into the background details first, those types of folks can get very frustrated with that and say, like, just get to the point. I don't understand what you're trying to tell me, right? And may cut you off. And a a lot of that can be solved by just making small tweaks to how we're communicating.
No, I think that's so important. I think I'm probably somewhere between a commander and a cheerleader.
Yeah.
Um, and when I have to deal with the process oriented leaders, I have a lot of trouble. Like, it's very frustrating because I just want to get this stuff done and cut through
Yes.
all of that red tape and bureaucracy. And some
Mhm.
organizations don't allow you to do that. And I find that very challenging. But I loved how you framed these four.
Yeah.
So you also talk about 10 discussions, 10 conversations. And I love how you grouped the book into these 10 conversations that you're going to have or will likely have with your manager. Um, which do you think out of these 10, and also I love that you have scripts within each of these. So I know we're going to put links to the how to buy the book, because it's really practical and tangible and you can get some great takeaways out of it. But out of these 10 conversations, because we don't have time to talk about all of them, which one do you think is the most important?
Yes. And let me also say why I decided to frame it around
Yeah.
conversations, because when it comes to managing up, we had the poll around people's confidence around managing up. And I think that also speaks to the fact that managing up is a much broader skill set than we typically think about it. And if you are someone who has been told you need to get better at influencing upward or influencing without authority, usually all you're given is some pithy one-liner about, like, be proactive or come with solutions, not problems, build relationships. And then you think, well, how? How do I do that? What if this happens? What if that happens? And so the conversations give you a almost a methodology to follow to develop this skill set of managing up. And like you said, tons and tons and tons of scripts, templates, all of that stuff along the way. Um, One of my, I guess I'll say, favorite conversations, but it's also very challenging for people, is the boundaries conversation, right? How do you push back when you're getting yet another task dumped on your plate? You're getting asked to attend yet another meeting that you don't have time for. What do you do? Because you can't just say, no, I'm not doing that, right? That's not going to go over well, especially if you're saying it to someone that has more authority than you. So, how can you be more diplomatic? And I can talk through a couple examples of that. Um,
Right.
so
Even
for
before you
Yeah,
get to the
yes,
examples, one
please.
thing I want to point out in some of the research that we've
Okay.
done and others
Yes.
as well is women tend to get asked to do more of those kinds of tasks, especially those tasks that aren't as promotable,
Yes.
than men do. And they get asked by both men and women because they know women are trying to navigate this likability, authority, double bind at the same time, so they're more likely to say yes. And so I love this conversation, would love the suggestions that you're going to share with us.
Yeah. And that's such a great point, too, because we do have to take gender dynamics. We have to take all sorts of dynamics into consideration here. And actually, in that chapter, before we even start to say no, we have to assess what is our pushback power. That's the invisible leverage you do or don't have. And if your pushback power is on the lower side, so for example, you may not be as tenured in your role, you may not have as specialized a skill set or stronger relationship like trust and rapport with your manager. You may be in an organization where the organization is in crisis or is in crunch mode. So there's not as much flexibility or adaptability, openness to that sort of thing. And so that knowing where to orient yourself there allows you to know how frequently and how assertively or directly can I say no. And so in that chapter, I give various options for kind of different levels of pushback power. And one of my favorite strategies to start with is ask questions first. Because what I find is many of us, when someone gives us that extra task, we go to one of two extremes. We say, sure, yeah, okay, and just figure out how we'll put it on our plate somehow. Or we get really defensive, right? Because we're already stressed out. We're already, we've already burnt the candle at both ends. And that is just the last straw for us. And we may snap at someone when we don't want to or mean to. And so asking questions does a few things. It gives you a moment to pause, to collect yourself so you don't fall into those extremes. It also gives you more information to assess the request because you may not know on the face of it, could this actually be a good opportunity? Who else might be involved? What's driving the timeline here? Do you see this becoming an ongoing request or a one-time opportunity? When you can ask questions like that, you can understand, actually, would this be good exposure for me? Would I be in a meeting with another senior leader that I would love to get to know? Or would this expose me to a certain skill set that within my 1 to 3 year vision for my career is important to me? So asking questions first. And then one of my favorite techniques from that chapter, again, there's all different types and tools you can
There's a
use.
lot in there.
Yeah, there's a lot in there to choose from because I like people having a menu because all of your situations are not the same.
Correct.
And so one of my favorite ones in there that I think is most broadly applicable is called the trade-off approach, which is essentially saying, okay, we previously determined X was a priority, putting Y, on our plate or on the timeline would jeopardize that. How would you like to reprioritize? What would you like to delegate? What would you like us to slow down on? And the trade-off does a few things. First, it's you shaping the container, the constraints of that discussion. Subtly, it suggests that you're basically saying, you're implying with that question that both of these are not possible, right? There is a trade-off that needs to happen here, and you are creating the boundaries around that. And it also, if your pushback power is on the lower side, this is great because it ultimately puts the decision making back in the other person's hand to say, okay, here are our options. What would you like to choose? And you can make a recommendation. You can say, from my understanding of the team's bandwidth, I would suggest we do X, but what do you think about that? But again, it makes you appear more like a team player while not just being a total pushover.
I think that's so effective. And I've done that in practice a lot. And the way that I approach it, again, it depends. As I was more earlier in my career, I would phrase it as, hey, here's what's on my plate. I really need your help. Can you help me prioritize what you think is most important for the company right now? Because that's exactly what it does. It diffuses your no, but it all, without actually saying no, you're saying no. And it shows that you're a team player, and it shows that, hey, I know all of these things are important, but I value your opinion because you're senior to me to tell me what's the most important here. And so that technique has worked and served me personally really, really well. So I can validate for you that it works too.
Yeah. And if I could just add to that quickly, because I think that's important, that um, it is very helpful to build the skill of upward empathy. And upward empathy doesn't mean you accept or you agree with everything your boss does. It means you make an attempt to understand it a little bit better, to understand where they're coming from. And I love phrases like, help me understand what pressures are you under that are influencing this decision, right? Because that builds trust with your manager, especially middle managers. I think there's been a lot of recent reports about how it's like the worst, most difficult job because you're getting pressed from both sides.
Yep.
And so to show, like, to express concern for your manager, they're going to appreciate that. And you might get a lot of helpful data, number one, to understand why do they keep changing priorities, or why did they say this was important 1 week and now they're giving me something else. And it allows you to also look for opportunities where you can take ownership, where you can say, well, could I step in? Actually, I would be happy to attend that meeting and take that off your plate. So it helps you unearth also other opportunities for yourself.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, none of us are perfect, and we might have tried some of these techniques before. What's the biggest mistakes, or what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen people make, and how can we learn from those mistakes so we don't make them ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I think we talked about one, which is not adapting your communication style or being aware of that. A lot of people were talking about advocacy, right? That came up a lot in the word cloud. And in the book, there's one of the chapters is all about the advancement conversation. And also right after that, we talk about the money conversation, another very loaded one. And a key idea in both of those chapters is that we have to plant seeds early, because what I see some people do is that we wait until the formal conversation, like our performance review or whatever it may be. We wait until that moment. We never mention our aspirations or what we would like to do until that moment. And then we don't get a great response because your manager can't make a decision like that on the spot. That
Right.
decision may have been made, or those resources may have been allocated months ago. And so you have to plant seeds when it comes to your advancement, even if that's saying something like we're recording this at the towards the beginning of the year. Even if it's saying, I'm already thinking and looking ahead to the next 6 months or year. By that time, I would love to have grown my team from 2 to 4 people. And so I wanted to have a conversation with you about what would you need to see to feel comfortable with that growth, or to approve that headcount, for example. And again, that does a few things. It lessens the you never want your manager to be surprised or feel like something has come out of the blue, right?
Right.
And so it's a gentle way to present the idea so that you can test the waters, right? And you can also understand, what objections do they have? Are there budget constraints? Is there someone above my manager that needs to be in the loop on this, or some other politics where we can't get headcount because another team has it, whatever it is?
Right.
It allows you to unearth those objections so that you can hopefully find ways around them. And there's lots of scripts for that in the book as well. But it also gives you, it helps you create a roadmap you can then work against, so that, 3 months from now, you can say, I would love to have a check in about that professional development item that we talked about earlier in the year. I've done X, Y, and Z. Do you still feel I'm on track for this to be ready for that by the end of the year? And so it doesn't become an afterthought. It becomes something that you are clearly, I always like to say, you teach people how to treat you. And
Yep. I love
when
that.
when you are the one who is, again, diplomatically, tactfully bringing up, hey, my advancement is important, I'm not going to let that be an afterthought, right? It suggests to other people this is something that should be taken seriously.
I think that's so important. And, part of why I studied organizational behavior when I went back to get my MBA was because I didn't like how anybody was managing me. And I wanted to be a better manager because I thought some of the techniques that were being used, I didn't really understand. And then I learned the theory of, oh, that's how it's supposed to be. And one of the concepts I learned was expectations theory. So EPO, expectations, performance, outcome. And so, Melody, a lot of what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Hey, help me, like this is part of managing up, lay out what is expected of me to perform so I can meet those performance objectives to then get the outcome that I'm looking for. To your point, your performance review should never be a surprise on either side, because if
Mhm.
you have a good manager, if you're a good manager, you're talking about this all along and the expectations are transparent, which is one of my core values, and really laid out ahead of time. We've gotten a lot of questions here, Melody,
Yeah.
about prioritization and pushback on
Mhm.
prioritization, getting asked to do more with less. Um, Totally hear it. Any tips on how to push back with the boss? There was one that said, hey, my boss sent it back to me and then said, oh, wrong choice, which is kind of like a gotcha moment. I don't even know if we can coach that one out. But any thoughts on, if they're not really helping you prioritize, how can you escalate that to the next step?
Yeah, there's another technique I mentioned in that chapter. This is not mine. This comes from William Ury and Roger Fisher at the Harvard negotiation process
Hmm.
project. Sorry, and it's called the positive no. And so the positive no is, it's basically, here's what I can do with the bandwidth I have. And so if you are given an unreasonable timeline or you're being asked to do both things, you can say, all right, that's fine. What I can do here then is I can have this piece for you in this timeline and I can have the rest for you by this date. How does that sound? So again, it's negotiating the priorities. It's not just like, yes, and I'll figure it out, I guess, but it's also being clear about this is what you're going to get when. Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and that creates an additional level of accountability and buy-in on the timelines, which is really, I think, alleviates a lot of managers' stress when they know what can be done. Um, One other comment that we have, the question about performative performance review, promotion conversations. At what point have you tried to manage all of this and it's not working? And at what point do you say it's not going to work and what should I do?
Yeah. Yeah. And that happens, right? And I think managing up is actually like attempting the things in this book is the best way to validate is this the right environment for me?
Right.
Right? Because you you want at least the people I tend to work with, they want to feel like I have tried what I can to make this work. And if this is not the right environment for me, then I'm leaving with the confidence knowing that, feeling like I'm not running from a situation, I'm working towards something that's better for me. And so even the skills that you will learn with a difficult manager, whether it is like it's negotiation, it's strategic communication, it's having to build other relationships because they're not an ally for you. Like, no matter what, that is going to be valuable for you wherever you go next. And this is exactly why the final chapter in the book is called the quitting conversation,
Right.
because you can do every single thing right. You could do every single technique in this book, and you still may not be getting anywhere. And that is your signal that, you know what, my time, what is that? Nothing is worth the cost of your peace. At the end of the day, you have to weigh the calculus of if you have a difficult manager. Let me also say that I mentioned earlier that managing up is not just about your boss. I think we have this idea
Right.
that your manager is your number one customer, get that relationship down and everything else will fall into place. And that is just not true anymore for various reasons. Your manager may change on a dime, right? That person may leave. There may be a reorganization. You may not get along with that person. And organizations are complex. You may have project sponsors. Your promotion is dependent on a committee, a panel. And so you can't just be reliant on your boss. And
Yep.
so that's what, for anyone who feels like I'm hitting barriers with my manager, you need to have the networking conversation to have other allies, not only who can provide sponsorship and advocate for you, but for things like advancement, can give you the lowdown on how does this really work? How does this actually work? I've had clients where I worked with someone last year who she hadn't been promoted for many years. Her manager kept saying to her some version of just keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. Your time will come. Keep doing what you're doing. And what was the breakthrough for her was she reached out to a more senior person in a different part of the company for just sort of a networking, would love to get to understand your role. And out of that, she started to talk about this struggle. And this person said, oh, you know what? I can get that process going for you. And he did. And, we had to strategically navigate then how to share that with her boss and get him on board.
Yep.
The short story is it ended up working out okay. But I think if you're having problem with your boss, do not make them your single point of failure. Those people can give you the lowdown on how does advancement really work here. I have had people who their manager is blocking them, and through their network, they were able to find another opportunity in a different part of the organization. So they didn't have to leave the company,
Right.
but they could change teams, departments, orgs within that.
No, that's really
Yeah,
important. And that sometimes you just have to leave.
yeah, exactly.
Sometimes you just have to leave. What did you know? This is the fun part about being in academia or being a researcher. What did you learn? What did you learn about this whole area managing up as you were researching and writing this book?
Yeah, so many things. Um, I think something that was I think I knew deep down, but it really solidified it, is that managing up does not require you to be this loud, showboating person with bravado, the one that comes in with all of the buzzwords and, is interjecting in meetings. And when we think of like presence, I think we think of that very commanding
Mhm.
sense. And that is actually not what's what works long term. Those people, like, being a coach, I sit on the other side of these conversations. So I hear from people who want to manage up more effectively to their leaders, but I also hear from the leaders who are managing their people. And those people, the bravado types, they tend to flame out, and people know they're not a lot of substance at the end of the day. And so what I really learned through all of this was how much being successful at managing up comes down to emotional intelligence, right? Organizational awareness, being able to read the room, understand the context you're operating in, really have, we were talking about empathy before, getting into what are people's deeper pain points, motivations, and crafting your messages around that. So much of it is being perceptive and frankly sensitive to other people's needs, not just being the loud, fast moving one.
No, I think that's so important. I think you also have to do it in your own voice, which is what we're going to talk about next month on March 25th at our next webinar about authentic leadership, because you have to do it in your own way that is going to convey that empathy above, but it has to come from you as well. And that's going to be really important. So I think this will dovetail really nicely into the next one. We are basically out of time. So I just want to wrap this up. What is the one aha moment you want folks to walk away with?
Yeah, I come back to that idea of you teach people how to treat you. And just thinking about like more is within our control than we think. And especially, I'm going to make a generalization here, but women in particular, I think we were seeing in the chat as well that we tend to take on more of the office housework or have it thrust on us, right? We tend to be a little more sheepish about putting our ideas out there for many reasons. And what I want to say is just be conscious that you are not contributing to holding yourself back. Because if we don't speak up in meetings, then we may be inadvertently teaching people that our voice does not matter. And if we are the one volunteering for everything, answering emails within 2 seconds, then are we teaching people that will always be available, right? We won't have any boundaries. And so we have more control to shape the dynamics around us through how we show up, how we communicate, the expectations we set. And then when we do that, when we come from a place of more strength, how the people around you respond to you, that changes as well.
I love that. And what did you say again? Teach people.
You teach people how to treat you.
You teach people how to treat you. That is so powerful. Okay, I have a lightning round and I want to do one more closing poll
Yeah.
before we wrap up. We go back to the poll. This is what we said before. And this is now, I'm going to put the instructions on real quickly again. Do you feel better prepared to manage up after this quick 35, 40-minute conversation? Viviana, if you could put in the chat again, that would be great. Let's see how folks are responding. A little bit neutral, well, luckily nobody, not at all. And while we're having this poll running, Melody, I just want to ask you a quick question that we did not prep. Favorite Rutgers memory?
Oh boy. Oh, I don't know if this is fit for
It's
public
okay.
consumption. No, I'm going to say favorite Rutgers memory is I was the valedictorian of my class and I got to deliver the commencement speech to the last Rutgers College graduation. So it was very special to be on the quad to deliver that speech. I think there were like 10,000 people or something like that. It was like, it was, peak life moment that I will never forget.
That is amazing. It
Yeah.
wasn't hanging out at Old Queens?
Uh, yeah, I guess it
I'm
was. Yeah, it
kidding.
was.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Well, wait, is
What's
that still
the
there?
Queens, the place where all the college kids
Oh,
go?
I was gonna say the Golden Rail. That was the one that's probably still not there. but
It probably was not there anymore.
yes.
Anyway, that is beyond impressive. This was, as you can tell, very, very impactful.
Okay.
Most people got a lot out of this webinar, which is really, really what we want to get. We could not do this without our partners. So we thank all of our corporate partners for their sponsorship, for their commitment to what we are doing. If you want to help contribute so we can continue doing this stuff to make the workplace really work for everyone and help keep qualified and talented women in the workplace longer and more competitively and ultimately on track for senior leadership, please scan this QR code and we would love your support. Thank you all. Have a phenomenal weekend, almost weekend, and we will see you all hopefully in March. And thank you, Melody.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.